Go ahead.
So my question is, tonight you brought up Corey Good and some around Gaia TV. And recently on your telecon you had last month, you brought up the same topic around some of the information and being somewhat skeptical about some of the information coming out of that programming. With things like what William Tompkins is bringing up, the idea of Solar Warden and some of those other groups operating out in space, what things are you skeptical of and what things are you in belief
He's
of?
asking, what am I skeptical of about things that have come out recently with Bill Tompkins and others? A lot. Okay, so here's the issue for me. You've got to have multiple points of corroboration, and the bigger the tale, the more the proof you got to have. Now, what I would say is that I believe these men are sharing what they believe to be true. I also know how easy it would be to provide information that is scripted about that, and that is seductive and interesting. But I'm very cautious about saying that there's this positive evidence. The research, I mean, the volumes of research that I and other people have on this exist. Many people back in even the 80s have documented the military involvement with abductions. We now have an official with the Air Force counterintelligence confirming that. So there are certain things we can say we have confirmation of. There are other things that I wouldn't say it's impossible, because I don't think anything is impossible, but I also know how easy it would be, having gotten to know Dr. Fred Bell very well, and who had been in these deep intelligence programs and had been provided with information that was scripted, to get him to say and do certain things. That I want to be cautious about it. So, and this is not about personalities. I mean, I don't want to get into this whole personality thing. And someone said, well, you know, it's not about that. I don't care about any of that. I care about people not assuming facts that aren't in evidence, but also being aware of the truth, that people who have been in those programs, deep intelligence programs that are in unacknowledged special access projects, often are given information that is not true so that they will convey it to others. And they are being used for that purpose. A great example of that is a man, it kind of broke my heart. There was anybody heard of a group called Blink 182? So back when they were a young group, there was a guy named Tom DeLong that was following my work, and we met when at their apex as a group, and they, you know, I'd go on stage with them and things like that back in the early 2000s. And he has since been brought in, as you know, from the WikiLeaks by General McCaskill out of Wright-Patterson and some others who are feeding him disinformation about a threat, so that it'll get to the young people, like the new movie Independence Day, where they had the recruiting ad, you know, from the Army, to get people to buy into this us versus them alienism. Now, I don't think Tom DeLong is in any way a bad person. I think he, however, has been used to do that by General McCaskill and others, as have many other folks. So now people could say, my information, I've been used. Though you can argue this forever. All I'm doing is tonight trying to share my understanding of things. And where I end is where I started. Even if everything that is being said that is of a terrifying nature of things going on out in space or with this ET group or another, the only survivable operative system is the CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind system, where based on the principles of nonviolence and universal peace, we have a rapprochement with these civilizations, we establish communication with them, we develop a civilization on our planet. I don't think that is peaceful and nonviolent and does not go out into space violently. I don't think the solution to this problem is more war or better space weapons to target ET objects or each other between Russia and the United States. I don't see that that's the solution. Bigger and better or more fearsome weapons targeting each other or other civilization, this cannot be an answer. And I also then remind people that civilizations, if they had that clear intent and wanted to do something, it would be very easy to do. I mean, remember when we first detonated atomic weapons and this whole modern era of UFOs being seen all over the world, wherever there was an atomic weapons facility developing, both in the Soviet Union and America, Great Britain, France, everywhere. Well-documented disclosure project material. If they had wanted to just put a pause button on this civilization, they could have done it. They didn't. And by the way, at that point we had what? Vacuum tubes? They didn't even have integrated circuits yet. We got those from studying ET materials as fiber optics and other things. So I don't really see where's the beef here. Well, you know, now some people would say, well, they're just biding their time and they're going to get us in this sort of way later, and all kinds of paranoid fantasies. I'd say, well, if that's the truth, and here's what I'd say to anyone who has that belief system and that paradigm. You're entitled to it. I would ask that you, if you have personal knowledge of those civilizations and have access to them, that you set up a meeting between me and the senior people on our interplanetary ambassador team to resolve differences and go forward peacefully. I still don't think the answer is in saber-rattling, warmongering, and demonizing other racial species. That's alienism. One of the other concerns I have is that with many of these people, you'll hear that the ones that look Nordic, shall we say, you know, I was talking to, I've spent 3 or 4 hours with Bill Tompkins, and the ones that kind of look like us, but are pretty, those are good ones. The ones that look some other way, those are bad ones. Isn't that interstellar racism? All right, it's just, I mean, take a step back. Aren't the good ones always the pretty blonde ones with the big breasts and the, you know, I mean, no, I mean, unfortunately this is really true. I mean, you talk to, and then the others are, you know, I find it appalling. I mean, I really go, are we really going to stay on that cycle of taking racism and turning it into alienism and finding some way? Now, ultimately, as I said earlier, I cannot prove a negative. I can't prove there are no civilizations out there that are worse than we are, although it would be hard to find worse than human society right now. However, if there are, I still say the solution is contact, communication, conflict resolution within the construct of universal consciousness and universal peace. And so I prefer not to just get into an endless battle, because it's an argument that will never end. The only reason I brought it up at all is because I'm concerned that places like Gaia TV or Conscious Evolution could be given information out there that is being scripted and being provided unwittingly from these folks. I mean, and sincerely, that if it is true, let's say that the slave races are out there and the slave planets and the slave ships and all this is going on, that you hear in some of the accounts from Corey Goode and others. If that were true, and that then is put out by into the public domain to then millions and eventually billions of people, in the minds of most people out here on the street, that would justify interplanetary war. And so we have to be very careful. What I'm trying to say here is that we have a responsibility here to protect the human consciousness. I'm not saying to cover things up or just not disclose things that are true, but to ask the questions, who would benefit from that kind of Manichaean, good and bad alienism paradigm, and the demonization of one group and the exaltation of another ET group. Wouldn't that build into the same dynamic that on Earth has gotten us to the brink of Armageddon? And isn't there a better way of looking at this? Isn't there a different way, not better, different way, that could lead to a world of peace here and peace with humanity, with these other civilizations? That's what I'm saying. And it is not at all to throw a wet blanket on anyone's parade. It's simply to say there's a responsibility here to look at it very carefully and understand that there are consequences to these kind of tales. And that you better be able to prove it, and even if you can, here's the solution. Now there, Corey Good and I would agree 100%. And we agree, I think, I have never met the gentleman, I think on a lot we agree 100%. However, on some of the things that are being shared as factual secret space program activities that have no other real good points of corroboration, and which I know, given how he was in the military abduction programs and what they are capable of, some of the experiences he has had, I'm concerned, have been scripted and may not reflect anything actually out there in deep space. Because I have my own experiences out in deep space, and I'm not going to go too far into that here today, but I have a different understanding of it. And I also understand that the sort of folks, and this is a soul-searching issue for all of us, the sort of folks who would put into the consciousness, mind, and experience of various people what has been shared about the secret space program have had the ability for 60 years to do it in a way that would be very convincing but completely scripted. That's why I spent that whole section talking about the electromagnetic psychotronic radionic systems that were developed in the 50s. And this is also why I think that I'd rather be cautious about this. And my concern is that when you have rock stars and other people, and then millions of people who otherwise would be New Age, progressive, whatever, buying into a Manichaean black and white, us versus them, good and bad, they're just being brought into alienism. They're being brought into a paradigm that supports interplanetary war. And my question is always, who would benefit from that kind of information? Now, I'm not someone who says that if there are such, let's call them misguided and dangerous elements out in other star systems, that we would want to ignore them. But I just think that we would want to discuss them and characterize them and interact with them in a different way. And I know that the folks who have been in the military programs connected to Mr. Tompkins and others have an agenda. And I question that agenda has to do with the propagation of fear and the convincing of the public that there's an existential threat, as Dr. Ronald Reagan said at the UN, that would unite the world to fight. And the purpose of that is this aggregation of more power. Because right now you have different coalitions around the world. If there was a threat from outer space, then all those different conflicting coalitions, whether it be Russia or America or China, developed world, would come together, just like the movie Independence Day, to unite to fight the ETs, the aliens.